Hey guys, I am on my way down to London today and I wanted to drop in and get this episode out of the podcast because it's an interview with Craig Lemasters of GXG. Now, GXG are a massive consultancy that deal with rapid learning applications. So they take on new leaders and they put them through mentoring and peer-to-peer relationships, and they support those people in learning new things, in upskilling and being leaders of the future. And we really focus down on Craig's background firstly as a CEO of Assurant, $5 billion industry over there. So we talk a little bit about how he brought that up, and then onto how he created the GXG company and now the exact methodologies that they use in order to bring people through this rapid learning, in order to upskill leaders and create some incredible results. So I really loved this episode. Craig's a fascinating guy. He's got an amazing career history. Very well spoken, very succinctly spoken, and just really riveting episode. I really loved this one. It was an honor for me to serve Craig on the podcast and to be sharing his story with the rest of the world. So that's all coming up for you in just a moment. And then one last thing before we jump in, and you know I talk about this all the time, but I talk about it because it's really important. Now, I hope you enjoyed the coaching episode that I did last time and got those insights into what those coaching sessions look like. And whether you are a coach yourself, or whether you're just mentoring someone, or whether you're in a community and helping that community at scale, the kind of questions that I was asking, the conversations that I was having, are the kind of conversations you can have, whether they be one-to-one or at scale, in your community. And that's what I think is so interesting about coaching, is it really is a way to support other people. And if you want support yourself, then now's the time to get in touch with me and book in a free coaching session. It's half an hour, and in that half an hour we're going to cover so much. We're actually going to find out what you're good at. We're going to find a path to get you to your destination, and that's a destination that's going to really resonate with you. It's going to be something you're passionate about. It's going to be something that fulfills you. We're going to find the path to be able to do that, and we're going to start outlining the steps you need to be able to get there. And all it takes is half an hour. And can anyone really say that they couldn't do with just a little bit of that? They couldn't do with just a little bit of someone helping them reflect a little, realign them, helping them carve out a path, and helping them see the tasks that they need to get there in the path. I think everybody needs a little bit of that. So if you need a little bit of that, then come over and visit me. Go to imdanthomas.com, hit that coaching button right at the top right hand corner, book in a session with me at a time that works for you, and let's catch up, and let's get to know each other, and let's get your goals identified and your success achieved. So there you go. Won't keep you any longer. On with the show. Hi everyone, welcome to another podcast episode. I am super excited to have Craig Lemasters on the line. The reason being is because we have loads in common, and he's out there supporting executive leadership through his company GXG, through their rapid cycle learning model, which is targeted knowledge transfer from experienced operators through a series of direct, intentionally programmed conversations. And what I love about that is just how supportive and how developmental all of the work that Craig does over there, and with a big focus on digital transformation throughout that as well. So Craig, you were an obvious person to have on the show. I couldn't miss out. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Dan. Thanks for having me. Excited to chat with you.
And we have a little bit in common because you worked for Assurant are credit insurance related, right? So you really turned that company around in your time over there. So perhaps you can tell us a little bit about Assurant and how the learnings from Assurant led you into the creation of GXG.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And actually, one of your former employers, Lloyd's, was a good client of ours for many years over there. So very familiar with those folks. And yeah, I tell people all the time, Dan, I've got a bit of a boring background. Actually, I worked for the same organization for 27 years, which It's a bit unusual. Well, it's maybe unusual more than boring, and it wasn't actually boring at all because I just had an opportunity to do a bunch of different things, and that's why I stayed. The organization gave me tremendous opportunities, and it was very fortunate the last 12 years to serve as the CEO of Assurance Solutions. And over that time, we got a chance to build about a $5 billion organization. And one of my passions was global expansion. Hence why I spent a lot of time in your backyard there and really all over the world as we built out our global footprint. And when I left a couple of years ago, I think we were in 27 countries. And just I tell people all the time, I had the best big company job anybody could have. And I mean that. I had a wonderful board of directors, great bosses. That's why I stayed so long. And really just thoroughly enjoyed it. Built a wonderful team there, and again did a little bit unusual. Just before I turned 55, decided to leave and go embark on my sort of 2.0. And a lot of people found that somewhat odd. And my wife actually did the same thing. She was a lifelong physician in a very successful radiology practice. But as parents of 4 kids who were sort of about approaching post-college age, and, we really just started thinking about what our passions were. And yeah, so I left public company life about 3 years ago, and I ended up buying this little company called GXG, headquartered in Atlanta. And the reason is really simple. I was one of their first clients about 5 years ago, actually. Had no idea, obviously, at that time I would end up buying the company. But the guy who started it was a really interesting guy, and I'd known him for a while, a wonderful entrepreneur. And he came to me with this idea. We were having breakfast one day and said, look, I've got this really massive network of operators, not consultants, but people like you that are just working and solving problems and doing well. And I think they would serve on small advisory boards to help clients that are struggling with growth stuff. And I thought it was a really simple but really interesting idea. And he asked me if I was struggling with anything, and I said yes. How about digital transformation? Something near and dear to your heart. Right? Who isn't? And it was really funny actually, because I think he was actually a little taken back because I said, yeah, I'll try this and would love to be a part of sort of developing this concept. And we did it. He went out and found 5 what I would call sort of rock star digital people. I mean, people in organizations that were really not just high potential, but actually doing the real component parts of digital transformation. The guy running data analytics for Sabre, for example, American Airlines in the US, Sabre System, huge data company, 2 chief digital officers in non-competitive fields, the guy running Microsoft in Latin America. These were really high-end people. I'm like, this is pretty cool. And so anyway, long story short, we used the same format that I actually use today. We had 3 meetings over about 9 months, and it was a game changer for me. I think as a leader, I always looked for these inflection points, like things that really moved the needle for me or my team. And I got to tell you, this format moved the needle. We were struggling with this digital transformation, like most companies do. You probably see this every day. And I was very frustrated as to why. And what I found was by putting this, as I would call it, wisdom in the room, and I define wisdom as this just sort of unique intersection of knowledge and experience, not people that are better than us or smarter than us. They just happen to have done some things that we haven't done yet. And we put them in the room, and then in a highly facilitated format, just helped us build a digital company. And literally in less than a year, we built a separate digital company at Assurant, and it became one of the fastest growing, and still is, parts of the entire enterprise. So it was a game changer for me. And then long story short, when I did decide to retire and left Assurant, reconnected with this guy, and he wanted to scale the business and needed help doing it. So I jumped in and bought half the company, and we worked together for about a year, and he retired about a year ago, and ended up buying the rest of the company. So we're, off doing the GXG thing now, and quite candidly, just having a ball. I tell people again, I had the best big company job. Now I have the best small company job. So I'm very fortunate.
I'm interested when you talk about that inflection point and you talk about digital transformation. What was it about digital transformation? I mean, other than that people were struggling with it, right? But what was it that was really resonating with you at that point when that you thought this difficulty or this struggle is strong enough to make a separate company out of?
Yeah, a couple of things, Dan. One is if I step back a little bit and say, well, first of all, why was I struggling in digital transformation to begin with? And what I've found now in talking to literally hundreds of CEOs since I started doing the GXG thing is the further we get from our core business, just the harder stuff gets. Now that's intuitive to most people, and we'd say, okay, yeah, we get that. But I think what I recognize is process. That's where the wisdom quotient, this knowledge and experience, really makes a difference. And I would argue at this stage, having done it now a few years, it's the only way to get unstuck. You'll hear me talk a lot about stuck and unstuck, and I think it's the only way to, in a reasonable time frame, get unstuck. And on specifically, if I look at things like digital transformation, I mean, our company, again, when I embarked on this, actually our company, we had record stock price, the company was doing well, good earnings, good growth. So it was kind of a hard time to get people's attention and say, look, as far as the future, I knew we had to be much more digitally savvy. I mean, you've been in the insurance space. It is not the most digitally savvy industry, let's just say. And we were no exception. I mean, we had bought like probably 20, 30 companies over, decades and never really integrated them and certainly never invested a lot in the systems and et cetera, et cetera. And we see that all the time now. And what I found was, first of all, defining what digitally savvy even means can be quite complicated. I think sometimes companies, and we were doing this, we get so caught up in sort of the blinking lights of digital and there's so many cool bells and whistles, but what does that really mean to our organization? And I found that starting with me and my senior team really struggled with that, is what do we want to be when we grow up, or when we're old enough to wear long pants, as you guys might say, right? I mean, what do we want to be? And what I found was this wisdom, these people who had built really, really savvy digital organizations and had done this work, literally could help us in hours what we were struggling with for months and months. And it was really impactful. And one quick anecdote that I share a lot now with certainly clients of ours and other C-suiters is, I think you're stuck when you have two things going on. Because when organizations get stuck with these really big, meaty growth challenges, we tend to only do two things. First, we have internal meetings, and that's sort of code for beating each other up, right? So we get very frustrated with each other, and we try like crazy to internally bust through and get to this goal line. And it's very frustrating. That tends to not work, again, if we're outside of the core. The second thing we do, when that doesn't work, then we hire very expensive outside consultants. And we spend lots and lots of money. And I did this myself, so I'm speaking from experience. And we spend lots of money. And the challenge is, while that's good directional help, and I'm not anti-consulting, used a lot of them, but what it tends to do is validate directionally where we want to go. So I can go spend millions of dollars with one of the big three consulting firms, and what I got back was, yeah, you need to be a digitally savvy company. So I'm like, okay, I get that. I'm struggling with how to do it. And that's what I think that's why I call it stuck. It's not that we're not trying, not that we're not working really hard, but we're stuck because the reality is we really don't have the wisdom to go do it.
I couldn't agree more with all of that. And I often talk about, looking at all of these digital tools and transformation, looking at it from an outcome perspective and saying, what is it you want your business to do and be at the end of this thing? It's not actually as complicated as it's made out to be. You have the ability to be able to shape those outcomes. The difficult thing for you is you need to decide, what is it that you want that future to be? And I think that's the hardest question, especially in an ever-changing environment, and one where you're not the disruptor. You still have the significant market share, but you're losing market share, and you don't have the disruptive edge to say, we're going to go all in on this new innovation that we've got going on. You've then got that big question of So what do we do? Right? Well, what is that future going to be? And then when you mix up other companies selling you new tools and saying you should move faster, you should be more innovative, you should collaborate more, the message gets lost, and then you end up putting in a whole load of transformation that's either not sustained, or it doesn't work, or your people don't believe in it, or even your leaders don't buy into it or don't understand it.
No, I couldn't agree more, Dan. And I think you're onto something extremely important. It gets overlooked a lot. We go through an exercise, simply put, called point A to point B. And what I mean by that, if we were starting at point A, we have to clearly define this point B, particularly as it relates to digital transformation and really any growth initiative. It's just amazing to me, even very basic ones. And it doesn't have to be something as interesting as digital. We tend to not spend a lot of time on that. And I'm pretty adamant now that we don't take on any work unless I feel really good that we've clearly identified a measurable point B, right? What is the goal line that we're after here? And then we can work backwards to, in our case, building these cool little advisory boards with the right talent from these very wise people externally to help us. But I can't do that. I have people all the time say, hey, can you build an advisory board for this? And I'm like, absolutely, we can build them for anything. It's easier to sort of deal in generic stuff and generalizations, and much harder to get really specific, I think.
Yeah, I do find that point B is the most challenging part of the whole process. And sometimes it ends up with people just saying, "Oh, can we just do it?" Right? We
Yeah.
can't come to a point B. Can we just start? Can we just make
Yeah.
some? And then we don't have any measurable outcomes.
That's right.
And then we wonder why we don't have any evidence for the change that we've put in, and we invest a whole ton of money, and we can't substantiate where that investment's going.
That's right. Yeah. No, you're exactly right. And it's super frustrating and very frustrating for leaderships, for shareholders, in my case, or a public company, for board of directors, and especially in this space. And again, people like you who really know what you're doing and care about your clients and are going to steer them in the right direction, unfortunately, are a little bit of the exception in this space. This space has attracted, I mean, candidly, a lot of imposters. I mean, people come in and there's so many buzzwords, strategy, and blinking lights, as I call it. There's just lots of blinking lights in the digital space. And I mean, we have clients that, and we did it at Assurance, spend millions and millions of dollars before they even decided on a destination. And no one's ever stopped to say, is that even what we needed? And it's just one of hundreds of examples. So it's a really important part of the journey, and one actually that I and we really enjoy at GXG, because if we do nothing more than that, even if we don't end up doing board work or our one-to-one work, we've really given, I think, a wonderful gift that at least we've helped people really clarify what is that point B.
So if I could, spend some time on that then. How do you help someone come to a point B? Right. So they come in and they said, look, I know we need to change all of our tools. This one looks good. That one looks good. What does that conversation look like?
Our practice is really an operating practice. So the way I come at all of those topics, the point A to point B is a good example, is really from an output-based approach. And so what I'm driving at is, what is the specific output that we're looking for? Forget technology. And again, it doesn't even matter what we're trying to solve. Digital is just one of them. But put all that aside. What does the output look like? Right. So let's pick the time frame. If is this something we need to do, or you want to do in 6 months, a year, 2 years? I don't like to go beyond a year or two. I think it's unrealistic. But let's pick the time frame, and then let's start drawing the picture of the output. And my team will tell you I'm fanatic about drawing pictures and flip charts, and a little bit old school from that standpoint. I don't like PowerPoint. Not a big. I think we hide behind PowerPoint. That's a whole separate topic we can talk about. But we start drawing that picture as just show me what the output looks like. And if once we understand the output, and again, it can be financial metrics. Often it is, right? So we have to improve some type of usually growth-related financial metric. That's awesome. If you tell me you want 17% CAGR in this in 2 years, then we can start to work backwards and deconstruct why we're only at 4%. Okay. And then we can start to really talk about, in my case, well, what is the wisdom that is lacking in the organization to get there? And I got to tell you, Dan, it's one of the most fascinating conversations to have with leaders when we start breaking that down, because they realize that I've got great people, but once we break down the component parts, there's 2 or 3 what I would call chunks of wisdom that we just don't have. And in my case, in my digital transformation journey, data was incredibly important with what we were trying to do with it. And we just didn't have a lot of wisdom around data, how to collect and manage and use our data. So one of our key priorities was to go find somebody who was really wise in that topic. And as I mentioned earlier, that's when we landed, thankfully, the guy running data analytics for one of the best data companies. And again, he did 2 things for my organization. He showed us how to do it, but he also taught my young team how to do it. So part of it is getting the work, helping us get the work done so we move forward. And the second half of the business model is teaching, right? He's sitting side by side with some really bright young talent, pouring into them, teaching them how to do it. Right. So that's sort of the process that we use. Again, all output based. And again, sometimes that's super painful because people are very reluctant, whether it's a financial goal or a people goal or whatever it might be. Sometimes it's a little bit of pulling teeth, but we get there.
I was going to say exactly that, actually. When you start looking at the capabilities of your organization and you think, ooh, maybe we have a bit of a skills gap going on here, and you're likely to. That's the whole reason why you're in the room in the first place is you're likely to have a skills gap.
Absolutely. But let's just have an honest conversation about it. I think leaders that are show a lot of humility and honesty about this stuff, and we go through another just simple probability exercise where I love to take, once we land on point B of this initiative, and we've sort of broken it down into 3 or 4 parts. I love to get this, typically have the senior team all in one room, and we play a simple probability game. It takes 10 minutes. And I ask them to assign the probability of likelihood of success doing this on your own over this next 1 or 2 years or whatever the time frame is. And 2 things are fascinating. We've done this a bunch. One is the diversity of answer in the room, which shows you we really aren't aligned, right? We're not aligned. And then usually the scores on at least half of the areas are shockingly low, meaning 10, 15, 20% likelihood of success. And it's interesting, if you have that honest discussion and you parachute or you telescope back a little bit, as a leader, let that marinate for a second, right? This is your job. Your job is to lead the organization to this point B. And we just did a quick and sort of dirty analysis, and you're saying you have to realistically have, with the wisdom you have today, 20% likelihood of success, right? And again, I think if we do that process honestly, there's actually a lot of good news embedded in there, because it's not that you have bad people, it's just they haven't done this stuff yet. So the question becomes, how can we very quickly move people up the learning curve? And that's when I had the passion of really building this GXG model. And that's really all it is. When I talk about rapid cycle learning, this phrase we've coined for it, I think it's, again, when I talk to folks like you, it's very intuitive how we get stuck, where we're stuck, this wisdom gap, as you noted, that is in the room. So the only question that's left is, how do we solve for that quickly? And that's when I landed on the rapid cycle learning methodology.
And I'm going to touch on that in a minute, but I just wanted to sort of second that. The only reason why I consult and speak on topics like these is because I've been through it, the other side, and I can reflect on that and make something of it. I really struggle to think anybody really gets this until they've gone through it themselves. I think everyone needs to go through their own transformational journey in order to gain that wisdom. So the expectation of, can a leader who's got no experience of this and hasn't been in it, can they really have that wisdom and be able to run through it on their own without having been through that transformation themselves? Few might, Few might, but it's rare.
Yeah, and they're
I would
probably
say.
lucky, right? I mean, they're probably more lucky than anything else. And it's interesting you say that, Dan, because I think with the speed at which technology is developing in general today, and it's always been the case, but if you just take kind of the big couple of topics, right? Blockchain, AI, I mean, you pick it, there's a laundry list now. How do we expect leaders of organization to really stay up with that to the degree that we need to? It is really hard. I mean, I hosted a dinner in Atlanta with 20 CEOs of a lot of brands you would know, and we do these sort of learning dinners where we brought two people in from our network to talk about blockchain, right? And two just rock stars in the blockchain world. We had a 1 hour facilitated conversation, which is kind of what we do. And I asked them at the end of the dinner, right? These are CEOs. I said, coming in here, how many of the 20 of you felt like, and all your organizations are investing in blockchain, I'm sure you have tons of initiatives, how many of you really understood what it was? And
It's
only
complicated.
one of them raised their hand. I mean, one, and think about that. And then the second question was, okay, we've been here an hour and a half. How do you feel now? And most of them felt pretty optimistic that, in 1 hour of really wise people teaching me, I feel pretty good about it. And I see a path to go learn this. But it is daunting today. And again, that's where I was on digital 5 years ago when I first met GXG. What hit me was I'm in a meeting with my team. And again, we were doing well. And we had, like you said, we conquered the UK and many places with our product lines and done this wonderful stuff. And all of a sudden, we're bumping up against this digital transformation. We're kind of going nowhere. And so finally, I'm looking at my team going, why are we stuck? And the reality was, I think it hit us all that none of us grew up in this. None of us have a ton of relevant experience, right? And yet, think about that. And this happens every day in boardrooms all over the world. So the 7 of us are sitting in a room. All of us are probably a 3 or a 4 out of 10 in wisdom on the topic we're trying to solve, right? There's something wrong with that picture, right? And that's what I wanted to go solve because it worked for me. That's it.
You only need to be a few points ahead.
That's right.
As long as you stay a few points ahead, you've always got something to impart.
But if you're on the other end, you're at a huge disadvantage. I always tell people it's like me taking my car for service. I mean, they can literally tell me anything they want about what's wrong with it, and I have no way to question it. And that's how I felt on digital transformation, except there, the zeros are a lot bigger because we spent a lot of money, right?
Well, there's such an opportunity for, I mean, we're part of it, right? But there's such an opportunity for new and upcoming people who can take complicated processes and tasks, boil them down into wisdom that people can understand, and then feed that back into business in an impartial way. There's a huge opportunity for people who can do that. And there are so many people that can do that, and they can just look at a process and boil that down. And I think just a note for our listeners here, if you're someone that can do that, don't undersell that capability in you, because actually a lot fewer people can do it and articulate in a simple way. And it's very, very influential.
Oh, it is. And likewise, I would encourage your listeners, if you're anywhere around the space, keep at it. And I can tell you one of the really encouraging things is as we've grown quite a bit and have built a lot of these boards, particularly around the digital space, it's been very encouraging to me as we reach out to people to participate on these boards. The talent we've been able to find. I mean, these are operators. And again, when I talk about wisdom and experience, it doesn't have to be old. People think of wisdom as old. I mean, even a few years of highly relevant experience and knowledge in these digital spaces, we're putting on people on boards that have done amazing things. And so it's been encouraging to be on the other side to see that there's people out there, and we need more. I mean, again, I'm with you. I would really encourage people in this space to dig in and learn it, and not just job security. You're going to have opportunities that far transcend, I think, other industries.
Yeah, I think that wisdom is just gained from the running through that process, going through that transformation, being open to change, and then taking a true, honest reflection on the results and taking the learnings out of those results. And that could be, that might be 2 or 3 years worth of experience. It doesn't have to be a lot, but just being proactive in
That's
that
right.
reflection.
Yeah,
If
that's
you,
right.
if you do that actively, you would be considered as someone who is very wise in this space and has a lot to impart. Because most people come out of projects like these and they say, done, next.
That's right.
They never have to look back. They never have to kind of measure it. It's in,
That's
it's
right.
done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
so we've been dotting around your rapid cycle learning, and take me through rapid cycle learning, because I really love how it helps people get unstuck, and you facilitate advisory boards and identify knowledge gaps, all of that good stuff. So let's say I'm a new leader, just into the business, don't really know what the direction is. I'm coming in to you, and you're helping me take me through this model. What does that look like?
Yeah, so, and we really have two formats that we implement rapid cycle learning, and conceptually, and we sort of have talked around it already, Dan. But the whole concept, again, if you picture what I would call a learning ecosystem. So in the middle of the ecosystem is a leader or a group of leaders, senior leadership team, if you will, that are stuck on some type of challenge. And the challenge, again, is driven by this learning or wisdom gap. So if you picture it as an ecosystem, all we do in either one of our formats is go build what I would call these bubbles of this wisdom gap, these component parts of the wisdom gap, and then we populate them with wise people. So for our offering for leaders, and we call it one-to-one leader readiness, is just that. So let's just use you as an example. If you're going to be this new CEO someday, or would like to be, or maybe you're on the succession list already as CEO, then all we do is sit down and interview you and just have a candid conversation with you, not others, but you. What are the 2 or 3 things, and I like to limit things to 3 for some reason, but what are the 2 or 3 things that you believe you need to know to actually do that next job, or maybe even do the job? Let's say you just got promoted to be CEO, and you don't feel like there's probably 2 or 3 things you would really like to know a whole lot deeper. And that, again, super simple process, but most people have not gone through that. And again, almost it's kind of the same A to B thing I talked about earlier. I'm going to push pretty hard to get you to articulate, because we all have them. It's just being candid. And then once we know, so if, let's just say, one of yours would be mergers and acquisitions, right? You're going to be the CEO in 2 years and you've never bought a company and you need to know how. Well, I mean, what are your options, right? I mean, you can go to the board and say, hey, I'm not very good at finance and I don't know how to do M&A. I would argue that's a career limiting move and wouldn't advise
Yeah.
it. Okay.
Yeah, I
You
probably
could,
wouldn't.
take 2 years off and go to Harvard and learn how to do that, but you'd no longer be a successor because you would be gone. You could go to a class and learn a few things for a couple of days. And again, all those are viable options. You can join in the US. We have YPO, the Young Presidents Organization, World 50, G100. There's all these wonderful networking groups. And again, I had the luxury of doing most of those at Assurant. But what I found was, on specific learning gaps, these pieces of wisdom I really needed to know, those were not great learning mechanisms, right? Because we're really asked to go learn on our own, right? You throw me in a room with 100 other CEOs and somebody says, hey, go learn about something. I'm an introvert. And by the way, most CEOs are introverts. I'm going to go to my hotel room and call my family. I'm not going to go wander around and talk to basically strangers, right? So all we do then is take that, and in your case, if it's M&A, then we would put that as one of your learning bubbles, and then we would go find 3 people in our network that would talk to you about M&A. And so our secret sauce is identifying, again, point B. Number 2 is identifying the people that can really help bridge the learning gap. And then number 3 is to highly facilitate the conversation. This is the other missing link in this type of learning. Again, networking in general. I think doesn't work great, because left to our own device, just like you and I did before this call, we're going to talk about what, our family and our kids and sports and, other stuff.
It's just fragmented, isn't it?
It's fragmented. And even if we try to get on the business conversation, so we have a very specific format we use to facilitate those conversations. And it's all designed to extract the knowledge and wisdom from the one person and transfer it to you. And this, I know it works because I did it. I was, again, one of the first customers. And then the second reason I know is the number one feedback we get in our one-to-one program is, I had no idea I could learn that much in 1 hour. Right. And on the surface, that might sound a little hokey or simplistic or weird, but it's very real, Dan. And I actually went back and thought a lot about, like, why does this work so well? And if you trace back the history of education, it's quite fascinating how we got to where we are today on formal education and really education in general. And that history lesson became very important to me, because what I found was, when education really was designed, it was for wise people to teach younger and less wise people really hard stuff. And guess what? The format was mostly one-to-one, or one to a small group. And I think on hard topics, that's the way we're supposed to learn. So no wonder if we do it in a facilitated format in 1 hour, if I sat with you for 1 hour and let you pick one of the digital topics that you conquered in your prior life, and if I had somebody facilitate a conversation, me and you, for 1 hour on that, I would walk away from that a different person. Right. And so we do that, and then we repeat that over a course of a year. And so whether it's your M&A learning gap, or maybe yours is on strategy, or it could be anything. It can be on corporate culture. I mean, as we move higher in organizations, these topics get pretty meaty, and it can be very granular, like the blockchain one. We got a lot of CEO clients that want to know about AI and blockchain. Right. And so we do these 1 hour calls, and actually the format, that's for the one-to-one. It's the same concept for our board work. They just tend to be big, meaty problems, right? Or growth challenges. But in terms of the methodology, rapid cycle learning works the same way. So if you picture a board table, in the middle of that board table is this meaty challenge. Let's call it digital transformation. Right? Let's call it global expansion. That's another one of our favorite topics, right? That's what's in the middle of the table. And then we put the people around the table that have just done those component parts. And then they're sitting next to your senior leadership team. So again, we're pressure testing your strategy and rebuilding the future, but we're also teaching. So you're sitting next to somebody who has built the global organization. And because we're facilitating it, it allows that wisdom to transfer very quickly. You don't have to go to class for 3 days. That's the punchline.
I think it's so important. I mean, I spent a long time doing, training and education. I would totally agree with a lot of what people's blockers are. Is they're so far beyond having really done focused learning that they believe, or they don't feel they're capable of, like learning more and learning properly. And I often say in my talks, providing learning doesn't change people's propensity to learn, right? Linda's out there, the networks are out there. We could be learning all the time, and anyone could be learning all these things. So what is it that they're not learning? And if we look at the 70-20-10 model for learning, you've got a huge 70% of that is your peer side of learning, and how powerful peer learning is when you're putting together those learning programs. And essentially what you're talking about is creating a peer network that can support you in your learning. You've got elements of mentoring, so you're creating a safe space and facilitate conversation to ensure that the outcomes that person's looking to pursue are really being honed in on and supported so that they can learn a great deal. And if you have people that have already got that wisdom, gone through all of these problems, and now they're sat in the room and they say, we'll tell you what you need to know, and we can cut out all of the stuff that either doesn't work anymore or didn't work when we tried it, right? The amount of relevant information that you can learn is huge, and you're doing it in an environment that's very receptive and tailored to you because you're in the conversation and not just reading a book and trying to apply it. It doesn't have to be, like you say, as complicated as it's made out to be. Working out loud circles are a really good example, not quite to this depth, but of how you can bring people together, find an objective and a topic, and then work with peers in order to do that. Masterminds are another good example, and they're ever popular because they have a very clear focus, surrounded by peers that can teach you about the objective that you have. So I love that you're doing that in a way that is scalable, and support organizations, and that you're saying, look, anybody can learn this stuff, right? Instead of the approach of saying you either have the talent or you, and if you don't have the talent, you're going to have to lose some people to replace them with the people that do have the talent, right? There really is a good empowerment side to what you're doing. I really like that, that close support.
Yeah, I like the way you put it, Dan, and that's my dream, is to help these organizations sort of see that light at the end of the tunnel. Quite frankly, most clients, and I sat in that chair for 12 years, that job can feel very hopeless at times. Very hopeless, because you really don't have peers. Like I said before, you can't run to the board and say, hey, I'd love to take us to point B, but I really don't know what I'm doing. That's not a great move. Again, I can go to peer networking, which is nice. And usually what I get out of that is, well, everybody's struggling with that topic, but we're really, even if we do have a secret sauce, we're really not going to share it in that environment. Yeah, there's a little bit of ego involved, unfortunately, but you said something very important earlier to our business model, and this sort of this safe haven kind of concept, discreet, I would call it, is what I want to provide, and I think we do, is a very discreet place for us to pull alongside the leader and help them learn. I don't want credit. I don't want GXG to get credit. I had a wonderful, very public career. What I want to do is help leaders that have the look, I call it, that look you get when you're stuck on hard stuff and it's a little bit hopeless. And I want our business model to pull alongside and help you find a path. There are always paths to get through. And the challenge is, when we're doing it internally or we're using sort of academic-based consulting, right, it's not easy to see the paths. Not that you can't, and you might bump into one, but it is incredible when you put the right wisdom in the room, how clear these paths get. And here's the fun part. A lot of times if people, our clients have already seen it. They sort of knew it was there. They sort of knew, okay, I had a hunch there. Okay, now you've got 5 people that have been down that road and it worked. Do you think they're more confident and they're going to move at a speed to get it done? Yeah. And that's really what it is. Again, it's not a super sexy business model. There's not a lot of technology. We use flip charts. We use a process called Decision Accelerator that we've designed specifically for these meetings. They're fast paced. We actually use a lot of music. The sessions tend to be very eye-opening and provoking. But most importantly, they leave with confidence because it's wisdom-based decision-making, and they can move at a speed they've never moved at before. And all I ask people, we have to answer 2 questions. I believe that leadership is defined by one thing and one thing alone, and that is choices. Leaders get paid to make choices. And again, we overcomplicate the job. We like to do lots of stuff as leaders, and it's fun. And I agree with that. But we really get paid to make choices. And that sometimes is really hard. And we make it a lot easier when you got this wisdom truck pulling alongside you, helping you make those choices. You tend to do them a lot faster, all right? Because at the end of the day, we got to do things differently, and that's hard.
Well, this is the strength of people that have reached that position, right? They're able to make choices. So you get those 2 sides of people. You have the people that know too much, and they've got too many things in front of them and they can't make a choice, right? And then you have the people that can make a choice, but they don't feel like they know enough to make that choice. So, it's either too much information or little information. And when you kind of put those people together, they can actually really help each other, because I imagine you get a lot of reciprocal benefits for all of the peers as well, in that leader's now giving them direction in their expertise.
Absolutely. it's actually both. We have some people that have information overload, and we've studied it, and we have what I would call lots of knowledge accumulated on the topic, but we don't have any experience in the room. So now we're stuck because we're afraid to move forward there, right? And then we have others that don't have either, right? So, and then we're just really paralyzed as the organization. And what's been fun after doing this for a couple of years, usually 10 or 15 minutes with a CEO or a COO is all it takes, and we can have a pretty good sense of where they are. And somebody asked me the other day, it's like, well, how are you guys growing like this and getting new clients and everything? I said, look, I just love to have conversations with C-suite folks. And I ask them one question, which is, what are you stuck on? And then we talk about the definition of stuck a little bit, and what does that really look like? I've had 3 or 4 sort of symptoms that happen in organizations when we are stuck. And most of them start laughing and look at me and say, hey, you've been hanging out in my office here. That's me. Yeah, I got a bunch of stuff I'm stuck on. Where do you want to start? So it's a pretty simple process.
Yeah, that's the funny thing. I do a lot of coaching sessions, and they're only half an hour long. People are like, what can we do in half an hour? It's like, seriously, we can do a lot in half an hour.
That's right.
We can work out exactly what you're stuck on, where you want to get to, and start carving out a path, right? We can do a lot in half an hour. It doesn't, like you say, it's so on the surface. When you get these people in a room, it's so on the surface because you can see the frustration or the stuckness, that as soon as you just kind of allow that valve to open and create that safe space for them to be able to talk it through, I often find, it's very difficult to make a decision on your own, entirely in your own head, right? Instead of talking it through. Once you start talking it through, I find a lot of decisions can become significantly easier to make.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny you say, I tell CEOs a lot that when we get into this debate about whether we're really stuck on stuff or, I said, look, it doesn't mean you're not working on things. I mean, the definition of stuck is not no movement. It's just you're not moving very fast. Right. And so I ask them to look at 3 areas. That's probably sound a little bizarre, but I think they're great symptoms to the bigger disease. Right. And my questions are around, on a particular topic, how many internal meetings are you having either per day or per week? How many people do you carbon copy on emails related to the topic? And how many PowerPoint decks are laying around this office right here on the topic? Right. And most of them, when we have that conversation, first they kind of chuckle and then they get very frustrated and say, guilty. That's us. That's all we do is we have meeting after meeting and we don't really move forward. I actually had a CEO tell me the other day that he had an email recently that had 265 carbon copies on the email. Now, tell me, how does that happen? How is that organization going to move forward with anything? They're paralyzed. And the same with PowerPoint. I had somebody, when I mentioned this the other day, they said, look at my credenza. And the credenza was literally full of both internal PowerPoint presentations and consulting decks on the topic we were discussing. And so those are just 3 of the many, I think, symptoms that say we really are stuck. And again, I think we can get to that relatively easy. The question comes back to, what are you going to do about it? And until somebody proves me otherwise, Dan, I'm sticking with my hypothesis that this wisdom thing we've brought to the table is the only real solution, and it moves quickly. So I'm sticking to it.
No, I totally agree. It's interesting, actually. I know we're sort of coming to time. It's interesting. Jeff Sutherland, who created Scrum and then worked on agile methodologies, he came from the Air Force. He was a Top Gun, and he created Scrum firstly by what he got teams to do is he got them to print out all of the documentation around one particular topic that they were stuck on, and some of the first times he did it, they would print out, and the printout would be as tall as him, right? All this paper, hundreds and hundreds of pages of paper. And then he'd grab a chunk of paper in the middle of the pile and he'd put it on the desk and he'd say, tell me about what this is and how this was helpful to everybody. And of course, no one knew what it was. Right, no one.
I love it.
And he's like, what? All of this stuff you've created, all these conversations you've done isn't helping you, right? It's such a good example of, you've gathered all the knowledge you need from the people you're talking to now. either we need to change the people or we need to change the conversation.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's a beautiful illustration of it, and the fun part after a couple of years of doing this now, I can tell you with so many of our case study clients that getting unstuck from these really, really hard challenges usually is no more than 3 what I would call needle moving events that we need to focus on. It's not pages and pages, it's not PowerPoints. It's usually 3 really significant needle moving things that we just have to have the wisdom that gives us the confidence to move at the speed to get unstuck.
Amazing. That's a great way to finish the show, I think. And it's so insightful. I really, really love your approach, and it's just so significant, especially from a learning perspective. I always when I talk about learning, I talk about opening doors, right? It is freeing people up from being stuck, showing them that they can learn more, and then giving them something that they're truly interested in order to be able to pursue further. It's not that people don't want to learn; it's just that they've become stuck or moved away from the habit, and everyone has the capability to do it. And speaking of the term unstuck, it would be remiss of me to not ask you about your new book, right? So that's coming out later on this year.
Yeah, so we've got a book, and the title is Unstuck.
Yeah,
And we talk about
exactly.
this radically simple way to grow your business through rapid cycle learning. And yeah, it's just a chance to tell our story. It'll be a fun book. Comes out, should be out in September, and we're excited about it. My team has worked really hard. They love this body of work and sort of our methodology. And most of all, Dan, because we see results. We're able to measure the results of our work, and it's exciting. So we just wanted to share the story with a broader audience. So yeah, hopefully by September we'll have the first book out.
How much can you tell me about it? Because I know in the synopsis you talk about how it feels to be stuck. And perhaps you could leave us just with a few indicators, right, of what might a person feel like if they are stuck? They might not realize they're stuck, right? But what are perhaps some of the symptoms?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I meant earlier. I can almost see it on their face because I got stuck a lot. I mean, you survive 12 years as a CEO of a big company. You get stuck a lot more than you want to admit. So I tend to be able to see on their face. But in terms of what it actually feels like, I do think there is can be a sense of hopelessness, because if we have good teams, and most people do, they have great people. And again, we've been having all these internal meetings. We brought really smart people from the outside in, these consultants or whatever, but we can't punch through. And so what I see a lot is stress in people. And again, I sat in that chair and I know what that looks and feels like. And I see a lot of stress. And quite frankly, that's sort of what I'm doing with my life now, and my work life is I can do something to help bring that stress down through our methodology to show them that there is a solution, and it's in this wisdom model that we brought to the table. And so we describe that quite a bit in the book and different clients and scenarios. And again, I think it's kind of a fun way to describe the topics, and we give lots of what I think are pretty cool case studies about, how this plays out and works. So stay tuned for September.
We will. And, what I like about it, it's so portable as well, right? It's not, I mean, the business is the use case that you're referring to here, but the methodologies and the thinking, you could apply them to anything in your life, whether that be personal or business or anything else, understanding the questions to ask yourself, being able to recognize that you are perhaps stuck. You may not see it in itself, and being able to move through it. I'm looking forward to the book because I know that'll be very eye-opening for me. So I'm very excited, and do make sure you let me know when it's out. I'd love to hear it. And just as a side note, you really should do an audiobook edition of it, because you've got a great voice.
Well, that's very kind. I get a little excited about this topic, and my team teases me for being a little verbose about it, but it is a passion, and I just want to help. I want to help people. We want to be in the background and see people do well. And you said something extremely important earlier, and I'll finish with this, is that most of these organizations do have great people, and we tend to jump to that first. Let's change the people, or we have a person that's going to solve that. that's usually not the issue. We want to come alongside and help them be successful. And that gives me a lot of joy. So it's pretty easy to do this work. And again, thank you so much for having me today, Dan. I really appreciate you doing this. And by the way, just so your audience knows, congratulations on child number 3, most importantly today.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I don't have to put up with much of the sleepless nights. I'm exiled to my little room that I'm in right now.
Good for you.
It's different the first time around. The first time you're in it together, but once you're at 3, it's just a little bit.
You've got a lot of wisdom on this topic now, knowledge and experience. I love it.
All right. So thank you so much. Leave us with one final thing. Where can people find out more about you?
Yeah, so gxg.co is our website, and we're headquartered in Atlanta, Georgia. And please reach out. Love to have the conversation with anybody about stuck and unstuck. Really enjoy talking about the topic, but that's the best place to find us.
Love it. Craig Lemasters, thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely a privilege. Thanks, Dan. Take care.
All done. I trust you enjoyed that. I certainly did. Craig, thank you again so much for attending the show. And don't forget to check out Craig at all of the links that he's provided in the show there as well. And there's links in the show notes too for you to go over and check him out. Check out GXG. Check out his profile on LinkedIn. Make sure you connect with him and tell him just how much you appreciate the show if it resonated with you. So, on to tomorrow. Tomorrow, another exciting episode. It's one of those big episodes again. The Thursday big episodes where we cover a whole big topic in detail. Excited to be getting to another Thursday and to be covering that for you again. So make sure you come back tomorrow for the next episode. If you want to see tons more about me, including clips from, insights from, the sessions that I'm doing, the conversations that I'm having, then Instagram is the place that you need to head over to. Every single day I'm publishing stories. There's opportunities to join my Spotify playlist. There's opportunity to see coaching calls. There's opportunity to connect with me and DM me. It is the place where I'm really spending a lot of time hanging out at the moment. So head over to @I'mDanThomas over there. Find out tons more about me. Get daily motivational quotes, support, and techniques that are going to help you keep you on track and help you continue to be heading towards your goal and your success. So head over to @I'mDanThomas and find me there. And I'll see you all tomorrow. See ya.